You've been searching for the best way to generate passive income in your life and heard that real estate is a great way to do it. But you're tired of all the so-called gurus who are all talk and no substance. Get ready to celebrate because Kevin Bupp has spent 14 years successfully making it happen. This is the Real Estate Investing for Cash Flow podcast. Now, here's Kevin Bupp.
Hey guys, Kevin Bupp here with episode number 136 of the Real Estate Investing for Cash Flow podcast, where our mission is to help you build and maintain massive amounts of cash flow through income-producing real estate investments. And our guest for this week's show is real estate expert and fellow podcaster, Keith Weinhold. And in today's show, Keith and I are going to be discussing the 5 biggest mindset myths that are killing your wealth potential. But all that can be solved with the proper real estate investments and education. Keith is an absolutely brilliant individual and has a wealth of knowledge, and I'm positive that you're going to find endless value in our time together today. And if this is the first time you're tuning into the show, I want to welcome you to our incredible family that we have here at the Real Estate Investing for Cash Flow podcast. And for those that are weekly listeners, thank you for coming back each and every week. I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for each one of you. So I'm forever grateful for you being a part of this show here, okay? And if you love what we're doing here at the Real Estate Investing for Cash Flow podcast, please go over to iTunes, leave a 5-star rating and review. That really helps us grow the show and attract awesome guests like Keith. Just a few laundry list items before we get on to the show with Keith. First one is I am going to be a guest speaker at the Best Ever Conference in Denver on February 24th and the 25th. I'll be sharing the stage with some incredibly brilliant people, and it'd be awesome if you'd come out and join us. And you can go over to besteverconference.com and check out more information about the conference itself and see who all the other speakers are going to be on the panels. And for those that come out, I've got a little special bonus or a little gift that I'm offering. On Friday evening after the conference, from 5:30 to 8 p.m., I'm going to be hosting a free mastermind, okay? A mobile home park mastermind. So for those that have any interest whatsoever in mobile home park investing, which is what I actually specialize in, you can come on out, and I'm going to have an intimate dinner session or mastermind session over dinner with a handful of other people, probably about a dozen of us actually, that get together Friday evening and spend 3 hours together speaking everything and anything about mobile home park investing. And I'm not going to charge for this. This would be a time where you can ask anything that your heart desires about this business, and we'll answer it. And we'll have an open forum discussion and just learn a lot of great information and share a lot of great information about mobile home park investing. So if you want to learn about that conference, besteverconference.com. Grab your ticket before they sell out. I know that they've only got a few left, and I don't think you'll be disappointed. I think you're going to learn a ton. Be a lot of great networking opportunities there. Another laundry list item is the free 30-minute phone call that I offer here on the show. This is a way for you and I to connect. No ulterior motives here. You won't get any kind of sales pitches from me. This is just a way for me to connect with the listeners and for you to ask anything that your heart desires regarding real estate investing, okay? To schedule that call with me, go over to my website, kevinbupp.com. On the right-hand side, scroll down about 3/4 of the way, and there's a button that says Schedule a Call with Kevin. Go ahead and click on that. I'll take you to my calendar link, pick a time, and let's get on the phone together, okay? I would just highly suggest that you actually put some information as you make that appointment. Put some information in there about what you'd like to chat about during the call. That way I can be best prepared, okay? Another quick laundry list item is I have another podcast. It's a mobile home park investing podcast, which, as I just mentioned, that's what I specialize in. So I do a weekly show on mobile home park investing. Now, I will tell you this, that even if you have no interest in mobile home park investing, I can promise you that you will find a ton of applicable information on that show, okay? Go just search it by my last name, Bupp, or search it by mobile home park investing, and you'll find it, okay? It's a weekly show we've been doing now for going on, I believe, 8 months, 8 or 9 months, and it's just chock full of great information. And again, a lot of the techniques and strategies that we teach are applicable to any other type of real estate. But if you have an interest in mobile home park investing, then it really is the go-to source, okay? It's very granular in nature. I mean, we don't take just that high-level point of view. We dig really deep into our own business model and share with you guys case studies, strategies that are working, and just everything and anything mobile home park investing. So definitely go check that out. And one last thing here, if you're in the Tampa Bay area, which is where I'm located, if you're visiting or on vacation, whatever it might be, I'd love to meet with you. I love meeting with others, connecting with others that are in this business. So if you have some extra time while you're here, be sure to give me a shout. Reach out to me before you come into town. That way we can coordinate our schedules. You can reach me at kevin@kevinbupp.com. And let's see if we can find a convenient time to get together while you're here. And so that's all I have, guys. So let's get on to the part of the show that you've been waiting for, which is our interview with Keith Weinhold. So here we go. Ladies and gentlemen, today on the show, we are thrilled to be joined by a real estate investment expert and fellow podcaster, Keith Weinhold. Since 2002, Keith has been investing in income-producing real estate in the United States and Latin America. His primary investment strategy is to buy and hold and focus primarily on cash flow. His investment preferences span that of Class C multifamily apartments and Class B single-family rentals and producing agricultural parcels. In 2016, Keith became a contributing writer to Robert Kiyosaki's Rich Dad Advisors blog. He's also the founder of the GetRichEducation.com site, as well as the host of the Get Rich Education Weekly podcast. Now, most of us investors, including people like myself, we tend to focus more on common metrics like cash-on-cash returns, cap rates, gross rent multipliers, IRRs, and such. But Keith has a slightly different approach to things, which is what's your return on time? And I think that's absolutely brilliant. So I'm looking forward to chatting with Keith today. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Keith Weinhold to the show. Keith, how are you doing today?
Kevin, it's great to be here. Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to give our listeners a sense of geography, where are we talking to you at today?
I am in my adopted hometown of beautiful and pristine Anchorage, Alaska.
Okay, fantastic. What is the temperature in Anchorage today?
It is exactly 6 degrees Fahrenheit. Yeah, right here in the dead of winter. That's not Celsius, that's Fahrenheit.
Yeah, and as we were talking before we started recording here, Keith told me that he was going to be bundling up in like 4 jackets to go out skiing when we're done with the show, and I'm so jealous of it. So, but I'm down in sunny Florida as I recorded, so we've got a drastic temperature difference here, Keith, don't we? I've got about 70 degrees outside, and you've got 6. So, but I like both. I like the cold and I like the warm as well. But either way, not to digress, Keith, what I'd like for you to do, if you wouldn't mind, maybe take a few minutes for those that don't know about you, that haven't listened to your show before, that don't know about your background. Take a few minutes and tell our listeners a little bit more about yourself and how you got into this industry.
Well, yeah, sure thing, Kevin. I'm a former Pennsylvanian, just like you are. I was born and raised with some great parents, but they were not real estate or entrepreneurial parents at all. And when I was growing up, one of the places I vacationed to was Alaska. I vacationed here 4 times. And, you know, the reason that we invest is we want to live a good life. Part of that is live where you want to live. So when it was sort of time for me to come of age, I graduated from college. I moved to a place that I dreamed of living, beautiful and pristine, Anchorage, Alaska. And when it was time for me to buy my first home after I was in Anchorage for a little while, rather than buying a single family home, I bought a 4-plex building with a 3.5% down FHA loan where I lived in 1 unit and rented out the other 3. And that's how I got my start. And from there, with using very little of my own money through doing cash out refinances and 1031 exchanges, I grew the portfolio nationally and internationally.
Fantastic. And so when you bought that first 4-plex, Keith, did you know that you were becoming a real estate investor at that point in time, or did you just happen to come across the good deal?
No, I really wasn't even into real estate investing that much, Kevin, and I think I paid full price for it, $295,000 for a 4-unit building. All 4 of the units would have rented for about $2,900, and I really wasn't even that passionate about real estate investing. I didn't really understand what it was doing for me until a couple years later. I had just kind of fallen in with the right group of, I guess, aspirational friends. Just like they say, you are the average of the 5 people that you spend the most time with. I had a couple friends that had started off this way, so I knew that I could too.
Okay, fantastic. And so you had mentioned that your real estate holdings have spanned that outside of Alaska at this point in time. And so I know that you like Class C multifamily apartment buildings, you like single-family homes, but what other markets, are you invested in? I know that you're throughout the U.S. as well as Latin America. Can you just give us a little bit of a background as to what other areas you have investments in, Keith?
Yeah, I invest outside of Anchorage, Alaska. Now, I buy multifamily buildings here in my market because there's in-state financing programs. And for whatever state that you're in, you might have in-state financing programs that are particular to your state. But when I first took a field trip with the real estate guys more than 5 years ago, I learned that it's smart to invest and diversify outside your own markets. And some of those other markets are Texas, Tennessee, and also with agricultural parcels in Central America. So that's diversification. I don't want to be in only one market because, as any savvy real estate investor knows, the market is more important than the property. And there's a lot of risk if you just stay in one geographic market for the most part.
And so, in today's show, Keith, we were talking about the topic that we were going to cover, and you came up with a great idea in that there's a lot of different myths out there that exist that are killing individuals' wealth potential. And so we're going to talk about the 5 biggest myths that are killing your wealth potential today. But Keith, before we get to those myths of 5 different myths, what I'd like for you to do is maybe give us your philosophy on cash flow. I know you're a cash flow investor. You don't necessarily buy for appreciation. I always call appreciation, it's like it's funny money, or it's like icing on the cake, right? We buy for cash flow as well, but would you mind sharing maybe your philosophy on cash flow and why you focus primarily on it?
Well, cash flow enables you freedom. It enables you financial freedom when you have a stream of income that follows you rather than speculating and hoping for appreciation. With that stream of income, you can buy time with it. It's very valuable to have that stream of income and get it when you're relatively young guys like you and I are, Kevin, because if you invest in something that only gives you a chunk of cash, especially something like a 401k in retirement, which is something I would not be interested in investing in, well, you really only get an income stream when you're in your 60s. Who wants to start living then? We're investors because we want to live well. I think delayed gratification sort of gets a popular name in investing. It's a popular phrase. I don't believe in delayed gratification. Why would you have delayed gratification, and why would one settle for that when you can get a stream of income in young age, in middle age, and in old age with real estate investing, and have that appreciation that it's not something that we count on, but you typically have that over time as well. So you really get both. And in fact, appreciation and cash flow are just 2 of the 5 ways that we're paid simultaneously as real estate investors. Just 2 of the 5 ways.
Mm-hmm. No, you make a great point there. You mentioned about how, Keith, you and I are both at young ages. I don't know how old you are. I'm 37 today. But, here's the thing about delayed gratification is we don't know if we're actually have tomorrow, right? We're not promised tomorrow. And the thing that really soars my heart is I see those that are out there that they talk about delayed gratification, or they work 30, 40 years. They build, they take their time building up their investments. They do it slowly and surely, and something happens. They never get to truly enjoy that lifestyle that they could have if they would have focused more on cash flow on the front end versus on the back end, or focus on appreciation on the back end. And I agree with you on that. I mean, I focus on now. What can I do today to build cash flow so I can live the lifestyle that I so choose? And I think you live by that same exact philosophy. I like it.
Yeah, I sure do. Okay, so we buy for cash flow, and I mentioned the 5 ways that real estate investors are paid simultaneously. Number 1's appreciation, and it's typically leverage. Number 2 is cash flow. Number 3 is loan pay down made by others. Number 4 is amazing tax benefits, and then the 5th one is an inflation hedging benefit when we tie up long-term fixed interest rate debt. But back to appreciation and cash flow, the interesting thing is after I buy a property and I've owned it for a while, and then I sell it, typically as part of a 1031 exchange, I kind of do a forensic analysis. And forensically, I look at how I was paid best during the lifespan that I owned that property. Oftentimes, I got more financial benefit from the appreciation than I did the cash flow on, say, a 6-year buy and hold.
Mm-hmm. Okay, interesting. But when you bought that property, did you initially focus on the appreciation, or were you focused on what kind of cash flow it's producing?
Right, it's bought for cash flow. It's purchased with that in mind.
Sure. Okay. Well, fantastic. Well, I don't want to digress too much away from the topic of discussion today, and I know that we're probably going to cross back over a couple of those bridges as we go through these different myths. And so why don't we do this, Keith? Why don't we just roll right into it? And what I'd like for you to do is maybe share with us, what is that first myth that you feel is killing our wealth potential today? I mean, you came up with these 5 different myths, or you didn't come up with these, but these are the most common myths that you have heard from others that are, either currently investing in real estate, or they're not investing in real estate. They don't think they have the time or the energy or the money or whatever it might be. So share with us that very first myth. What is it?
There are 5 mindset myths that are killing your wealth. And I did somewhat come up with these on my own. I was probably influenced over time by things I've heard and seminars I've attended and books I've read. And, before I give the first myth, let me just talk about why we even want to talk about 5 mindset myths that are killing your wealth. That's because you have the potential to live a life far better and far richer than you ever thought. Why live below your means when you could expand your means, okay? And, I think some people, some detractors of those that look for financial betterment, they might say something to you and I, Kevin, or your listener. They might say something like, oh, well, I'd rather be happy than rich. And to that I would say, Why not be both? Okay.
Exactly.
In this life, you were given a body and a life, and that is something fantastic, and that's worth a lot. You were given this vessel called life, and if you're given a vessel called life, you might as well fill it with the good stuff if it takes just as much effort to fill it with the good stuff as it does the scarce stuff, okay? Just the same way, if you buy a McMansion, a vessel, something worth having, you don't fill it with a bunch of cheap camping furniture, okay? If you buy a luxury car like an E-Class Mercedes, which I happen to drive, you don't put a whole bunch of stupid bumper stickers on it, okay? And if you go on an exotic European river cruise, you don't eat Skittles when you're on the cruise, okay? Well, in the same way, you don't fill your life with a bunch of small thoughts and scarce actions. Really, the first step in solving any problem is recognizing that there is one. And really the problem is one of lifestyle arbitrage. Arbitrage is the difference between how you are living and thinking and how you can live or think. It's sort of what psychologists call cognitive dissonance, Kevin. Cognitive dissonance, it's the difference between what you believe to be true and what really is true. And that leads us into the first of 5 mindset myths that are killing your wealth. And that first myth is that you think smart investing is getting your money to work for you. I'm telling you that's a myth, and that's never going to create wealth. Okay, it might create a secure retirement for you by the time that you're 65. Okay, most people know that they don't want to work for money. They think it's smart to get their money to work for them, but I'm telling you that won't create wealth. And I think you know the answer to this one, Kevin. Don't just get your money to work for you, get other people's money to work for you. That's what makes this myth go away. Now, how do you get other people's money to work for you? I mean, to the uninitiated person, they're thinking, is that legal? Is that even ethical to get other people's money to work for you? Well, yeah, when you go ahead and buy a property, like I bought the fourplex building, or like you today, if you buy a $100,000 property with a $20,000 down payment, you're using other people's money 3 ways at the same time. Number 1, you're using the bank's money for the loan. Number 2, you're using the tenant's money for the income. And then thirdly, you're using the government's money for generous tax incentives because you created value for society by providing them with housing. So the government gives you the mortgage interest deduction and tax depreciation. And it's ethical if you operate the right way. And I'm in business to operate the right way. Like for me, Kevin, my personal mission is to provide housing that's clean, safe, affordable, and functional. So if I provide housing for society that's clean, safe, affordable, and functional, I never get called a slumlord, and I can feel validated in being a profiteer. So in summary, don't just get your money to work for you. I'm sorry, it's not going to create wealth. You need to think and act differently. You can make other people's money work for you 3 ways at the same time: the banks, the tenants, and the governments.
No, I think that's you make some great points there, and it's interesting. I was thinking of the 3 you were saying. There's 3 big ways, and I'm like, okay, well, you got the bank's money, you got the tenants, and then it's got to be the tax benefits, and that's exactly what it was. And those are huge. The tax benefits are. Those are something that I feel like a lot of novice investors, they miss out on initially. The only thing that a lot of times goes through their mind when they first think about becoming a real estate investor is either the cash flow or the appreciation. They never think about that third component. They always miss out on that, and that is one of the most powerful components of the whole equation. Yeah,
that's right. Especially that tax depreciation portion that the government gives you. And the short story on that is basically that you don't even need to pay tax on all of your rent income with tax depreciation. And that one's magical because you did not have to spend any money to get that deduction. The government gives you an annual allowance without getting into all the numbers where you're able to write that off. So it's a non-cash expense. That's why some people call it the magic of depreciation. You didn't have to spend a dime in order to get that benefit. It's other people's money. You've really got to focus on that.
And I see myth number 2. Myth number 2 is something that Dave Ramsey talks about all the time, Keith. What is that? And I don't believe with his philosophy at all. So please tell us, what is myth number 2, and please debunk it for us.
I know we're on the same page with this one. The second mindset myth that's killing your wealth is that you think you want to be debt-free. And I'm telling you right now, if you focus on being debt-free, it's very difficult to create wealth. I don't think that you do want to be debt-free. Instead, you want to be financially free. Being financially free has significantly more power. So what is the difference? And what do the terms even mean? Well, being debt-free means that you don't owe anybody anything. Well, if you don't owe anybody anything, you're not going to create financial leverage. And no one got wealthy just retiring their debt. No one cuts back and shrinks their way to wealth. Instead, when you're financially free, the definition of financially free is, frankly, the way I'm essentially living. You can do what you want to do when you want to do it because you have enough passive income streams, especially through what we talk about, Kevin, real estate. You have enough passive income streams to meet or exceed your living expenses so that you don't have to work for anyone if you don't want to. I don't work for anybody. Now, how does this kind of manifest itself? Let's take a look at maybe a concrete, actionable example so that you can see such that if I tried to undo being financially free and trend toward debt-free, how that would actually hurt me. Because when you take steps toward being debt-free, oftentimes one takes steps away from being financially free. And I'll just give a very concrete example. Just take a look at my wife and I's Anchorage, Alaska home. I owe $410,000 on the mortgage balance. That's how much it would take to pay off my home. Well, I have the ability to pay off my home and be debt-free if I want to, but I choose not to. Now, the way I could pay off my $410,000 principal balance on my home, Kevin, is if I went and sold some of my apartment buildings and cashed out some of that apartment building equity to go ahead and retire my debt. But see, I wouldn't want to do that. I wouldn't want to undo what I've done because if I sold those buildings, I would reduce my cash flow streams. And if I sold enough of those buildings to pay off the $410,000 loan, the cash flow stream drain down, that would be even greater than how much I owe on the mortgage payment on this home every month. So that would be one of the most reckless things that I could do. Additionally, I'd lose all the tax benefits on those buildings. I'd lose the principal pay down that tenants are making on those buildings for me. And I would just lose so much of my freedom because those income streams would be gone. So by actually trying to retire my debt and be debt-free, I would take a step away from being financially free.
Mm-hmm. So if you were in a room with Dave Ramsey, Keith, what would your argument be? I mean, that's your argument. What would his argument be against that? I mean, because I don't understand his side of the equation. Is he just speaking to a completely different crowd that hasn't had the proper financial education? Is that really what it comes down to?
Yeah, you know what? I think it's easier, like in the Dave Ramsey case, it's easier to preach affirmation than it is to dispense information, okay? I'm dispensing concrete, factual information, which causes a mindset shift, okay? Because we're talking about 5 mindset myths that are killing your wealth. Sure. Someone that thinks you need to be debt-free, well, they're just kind of dispensing affirmation, okay, and what you already believe. And it's easier to reinforce what you already believe.
Sure.
And why do people believe like the scarce way and the debt-free way? That's because that's how they were raised by their parents. Their parents never got a formal financial education. And, frankly, your financial advisor, they're just telling you a whole lot of conservative advice that, compound interest is the way to wealth and you want to retire your debt and all that. So, people need to get around and make the average of the 5 people they spend the most time with somewhat different. Talk to someone that's financially free, hear it from me, someone that's actually doing it, not just reading it in a book.
Sure. Okay, great advice. Well, let's move on to myth number 3. And what is that myth, Keith?
Well, I touched on it a little bit. Myth number 3 is that you think that compound interest is going to create wealth. Compound interest will not create wealth for people in almost every case. Leverage is what creates wealth. Okay, Let's go ahead and take a look at these definitions and let's kind of look at an example of compound interest. And in fact, it was Einstein that famously posited that compound interest is the 8th wonder of the world. I don't know if Einstein ever knew what leverage was actually. Okay. I think an example that a financial advisor wants to give on compound interest is a penny doubled for 30 days becomes several $1 million if you go ahead and double that penny. But the problem with compound interest is you don't get a 100% rate of return anywhere, and compound interest really does not create wealth. I mean, that penny doubled definition is powerful, but in reality, for a lot of people, if they just invest in the S&P 500, just take a look at the long-term average of the S&P 500, you get a number of 10%. and people want to go ahead and compound that over time, especially your financial advisor, to see what that turns into. But it's not really 10% once you adjust for inflation, once you adjust for taxes, once you adjust for fees, once you adjust for emotions in a volatile investment like the S&P 500, where people are tempted to sell low and buy high, which is exactly the opposite of what they're supposed to be doing. Compound interest doesn't create wealth. I think a lot of times your financial advisor tells you, well, your 401k or with compound interest, it guarantees that you're going to be a millionaire. Well, a millionaire is not wealthy today. You know, millionaire just kind of has this cachet about it that makes people think they're wealthy, but it isn't. In fact, for a millennial with 40 years to retirement, just at 3% inflation, that's only going to be $306,000.
Wow.
A million just isn't that much. And it really is not a wealth creator. 1 million grains of salt fits in a 1-gallon jug. A million is just 1,000 times 1,000. You know that, Kevin? It's just 1 million minutes is only 1.9 years. In fact, 1 in 10 U.S. homes already have millionaires living in them, such that, did you know this, Kevin?
Is it really that high of a number? 1 in 10
Yeah,
homes?
it's already 1 in 10 now. And a millionaire's preferred car is a Ford, okay? That's how common and everyday a millionaire is. You know, some people think a millionaire means that you have an income of $1 million per year, but it doesn't. That just means you have a net worth of $1 million. That means your assets minus liabilities are $1 million, and that's it. $1 million $100 bills weighs 22 pounds, and I know you and I are using dumbbells bigger than that for curls, Kevin. I mean, you know, it's not that much. So
I'm very glad you came up with all these comparisons, Keith, for me. You just gave me a couple of giggles there. I like that.
Yeah, well, that's all $1 million is. You know, people think it's some unattainable magical number, but instead, let's look at a wealth creator like leverage, okay? Not just compound interest, but effectively leveraged compound interest. In that most simple example, when you put $20,000 down on a $100,000 property, let's just look at real estate's historic appreciation rate over time, Kevin. It's about 6%, just nationally, historically. Okay, so that means after 1 year, your $100,000 property appreciates to $106,000. Not very exciting, right? But you only had to put a $20,000 down payment on that property to get a $6,000 gain. So your $6,000 gain divided by 20K of your skin in the game, that means you have a 30% ROI, and that's one of only 5 ways you're paid in real estate investing. So 30% ROI, wait a second, how did that exactly happen? That's because you used other people's money again. So you used leverage. You leveraged it to get a 30% ROI. So compound interest alone doesn't produce a great rate of return. It sure doesn't create wealth over time. It's something like leverage when you go ahead and borrow from the bank. Other people's money creates wealth for you.
You mentioned something in the beginning of the show regarding those that have created, I forget exactly how you worded it, Keith, but those that have created massive wealth. If you looked at their historical performance, you're going to see that they've utilized leverage to build that massive wealth. I mean, any of the highly successful real estate moguls that are out there today, the Donald Trumps of the world, and I shouldn't use that name because that could be politically incorrect now to throw his name around, but any of the other big moguls that are out there, they've used leverage to get where they are today. They haven't just used their own money and leveraged their own money to get to where they are. So very, very powerful tool.
And the great news is that you don't need to be a mogul to get leverage. You know, anyone with an average or even a little bit worse than average credit score with a stable income can go ahead and get an $80,000 loan on a $100,000 property. So that rate of return, you get that return on both your $20,000 down payment and you got the return on the $80,000 borrowed from the bank. So that is the third one, that you think compound interest is a wealth creator. So before we get down to the fourth myth, just to review, the first one was that you think you should get your money to work for you. The second myth was that you want to be debt-free. The third one is that you think compound interest is a wealth creator. And, you know, at this point, I kind of have to ask you to suspend your disbelief, because some of you might be hearing these things for the first time. And, you know, if you're not as wealthy as you want to be right now, it might be because you believe some of these myths. So you just need to suspend disbelief and hear it from somebody that's actually doing it, because this fourth one can really blow some people away. Even some people that are intermediate to advanced real estate investors don't realize this next one. And the fourth out of 5 mindset myths that are killing your wealth is that you believe that equity has a rate of return. Mm-hmm. Well, I'm here to tell you that the rate of return from home equity is and always will be zero. Okay, we're not talking about ROE, return on equity. That's something different. The return that equity actually provides to you is and always will be zero. Okay, home equity is unsafe. Home equity is illiquid, and the rate of return from home equity is zero. Now, how can that be zero, or how can that be unsafe? In fact, it's often even worse than having money in a savings account, because even though you don't get any return from your equity, it's also illiquid. At least money in a 0% savings account would be liquid. So let's talk a little bit about why it's unsafe and why its rate of return is zero. Let's just take an example. Let's just say that you live in a $300,000 home. Let's say your $300,000 home appreciates up to $330K. Okay, that's a nice little return. Mm-hmm. Well, my question is, how much did the equity that you have in that property contribute to that property's appreciation rate? It didn't contribute to it at all. Yeah. So the rate of appreciation has nothing to do with how much equity that one has in a property. Equity is your skin in the game. It's the difference between how much you own and how much you owe. So if the property went down in value and went the other way, let's take a look at that example. Let's say your $300,000 property went down in value to $200,000, and you had $100K of equity in that home. So your $300,000 property went down to $200K. Well, that was just a 100% wipeout of your $100,000 of equity that you had in the property. All of your equity was lost. Every bit of your equity was exposed to the market. So, if you had the opportunity to invest in something that could never go up in value, but could only go down in value, how much of it would you want? Well, probably nothing. That's exactly what home equity is. And some people actually try to accelerate their payments toward the principal on their home. Again, they're trying to get closer to being debt-free. Mm-hmm. But basically, here's what you do. When you make an extra principal payment of $100 and people think that's a good investment, here's what you're saying to the bank. Hey, Mr. Banker, here's an extra $100. Don't pay me any interest on it. If I need it back, I'll pay you fees. I'll borrow it back on your terms, and I'll prove to you that I qualify again. And when you do that, it didn't reduce your monthly mortgage payment at all either. So, and you know what? Even if someone does get to the point where they retire their home mortgage and pay the whole thing off, their payments on the property didn't go away. They still owe property tax. They still owe property insurance. They're still going to have maintenance and repair expenses. So, trying to be debt-free, partly because you think that equity has a rate of return, is just one of the most reckless financial things I can possibly think of doing, other than just putting all your cash on a raft and sending it down the river. Okay? So, and hey, you can buy property insurance to insure against a catastrophic loss like a hurricane or a fire or a tornado, but there's no such thing as equity insurance. So I'd implore you to think about how much equity you want to leave exposed to the market. Equity has a rate of return of zero. You're starting to understand why it's unsafe, and it's not very liquid either. And it actually gets even worse than that. If you have a lot of equity in a property, depending on how you structure it, that's low-hanging fruit. If, say, a kid falls off the monkey bars at your home, or a tenant slips and falls at your property, that's very easy stuff to go after. So, I guess really my point here, Kevin, is homes and properties are built to house families, but not store cash. Okay, homes are built to house families, but not store cash.
Yeah, no, you make a very relevant point there. In fact, I can give you an example of that exact scenario. Is an investment with actually family members, which I don't have many of my investments with family members, but this was one that we bought many years ago, about 5 years ago. It was an office building that had a multifamily component to it as well. And we bought it distressed. We basically picked it up for probably about 40 cents on the dollar. Actually utilized it as our main office space and leased out some of the empty office space to other tenants. Filled up the apartment complex. create a ton of forced equity into that property, and it was all said and done, minus the equity that we had into the property. We had built an additional about $300,000 of equity into the building, and didn't really need the space too much anymore. Could have just continued renting out the rest of it to keep it as cash flow. But we had this $300,000 sitting there. It wasn't really a property it didn't really fit our business model any longer. And, I got into many different long conversations with my family members as to why we need to take that equity. The equity is doing nothing for us in this property. We had X amount of dollars into the property initially. That was the only money that was doing that was working for us at all. That additional equity we had built was not working at all for us. It was getting zero return. And they didn't really understand the principle of that until I finally talked them into selling the property, and we parlayed that money into a much larger property via 1031 cash exchange. And we just had a conversation about the other night. We bought a 7-unit mobile home park together, and they're very happy with the returns that equity created from that property to where they were zero before. So,
sure,
it's just it was doing nothing for us at that point in time.
Well, sure. Yeah, you're using your equity constructively, So someone that has a lot of equity in one property, they can go ahead and remove a portion of the equity from a property, say their home, and then go ahead and purchase a piece of real estate in another market with that property. And as soon as a person does that, they didn't lose any equity. They just distributed it among two properties. And actually, they lower the risk because they have the opportunity to be in a second geographic market now, and they might increase their cash flow if the additional payment taken off their primary residence is exceeded by the amount of the cash flow in the rental property they've made out. So, you want to take steps away from being debt-free and toward financially free, and that's really just another example of that right there.
So, Keith, what are some of your recommendations for those? Let's say they have a primary residence. They have a lot of equity in their primary residence, but they want to start leveraging that equity to maybe buy their first investment property. Is it just a matter of a line of credit, home equity loan? What are some of the recommendations you give to your students or other people that you coach regarding tapping into that home equity to leverage it into some other type of cash flowing investment?
Yeah, well, that's a great question. Before we get to that fifth and final myth, some people, especially in today's low interest rate environment, they think, well, I wouldn't mind tapping my primary residence for some equity, but see, I don't want to refinance the loan that I'm in because it's at such a low interest rate. And you already touched on it, Kevin. One can actually keep that loan in place and take that home equity line of credit, second mortgage off that property. And those home equity line of credit payments, a positive thing is the payments are low because they're typically interest-only payments. You could pay extra principal if you want to, but after I've already talked about paying down principal, you probably wouldn't want to. But one thing to be cautious of is home equity lines of credit are tied to federal funds rate increases in direct lockstep. And as we know, those rates have been going up. So you really need to take a look at how much cash flow you're getting from the property that you go ahead and purchase with the HELOC funds. So that's one way to approach it, where you don't actually have to restructure and get a new mortgage on your entire property. You can take that home equity line of credit as a second mortgage and keep that first one in place.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great advice. So myth number 5, this is the last and final myth, Keith. This has got to be the big one, right? This is the big whammy.
It is kind of a big whammy, Kevin. And, it's really a rich dad paraphrasal. And the myth is that you believe that it's good to live below your means. You need to instead expand your means. That's what dispels that myth. A lot of people have misallocated time. We talked at the beginning of the interview how your life has meaning, your life has value. You need to expand your means. Well, a lot of people are misallocating their time living below their means. If your life's so valuable, you shouldn't be standing in line for 30 minutes just to get a free Chick-fil-A sandwich, okay? Not the best and highest use of your time. Mm-hmm. Before you go put gasoline in your car, you shouldn't be checking the GasBuddy.com app to let that dictate where you go get gasoline and spend an extra 10 minutes round trip to save 3 cents a gallon. That's a living below your means mentality right there. An example of expanding your means would be, rather than self-managing your portfolio, learn about professional property management. Network with the right people where you can get a recommendation to get the best property manager so that you're increasing your return on time invested, something that you mentioned early on in the show. That's expanding your means. quit living that small life. Read about how a 1031 exchange can expand your cash flow and expand your portfolio, and know the rules around that. I mean, that's expanding your means. So open up your time so that you can expand your means. And, the other thing with living below your means versus expanding your means is when one lives below their means, you can only cut so far to the downside. When you focus on expanding your means, there's an unlimited upside and you're living better anyway. So, I guess I'd really say in life and in investing, focus on production, not reduction. And with these 5 mindset myths, you're really kind of bridging that cognitive dissonance that psychologists characterize. It's kind of like Yoda in The Empire Strikes Back. You remember Yoda said, before you learn, you need to unlearn. So you kind of need to unlearn what you've already learned in life and that you think is true. And, I guess I'd say those people that kind of have a scarcity mindset, or those that want to live below their means, they kind of answer their own questions. They have a question about how something works in life, and they answer it themselves. They answer their own questions. Well, those with an abundance mindset, they begin to question their own answers. And that answer that they believe to be true for so long, they begin to question that. And that's really the beginning of abundance right there. So just like we are what we eat, we really live what we believe. And I think probably Mark Twain said it best. Mark Twain said, it ain't what you don't know that gets you into trouble. It's what you do know for sure that just ain't so. So expand your means. And, here's some good news. You might be financially free right now. You might already be financially free. You just need to turn some of your equity into cash flow. And that's what really creates wealth and helps dispel a lot of these mindset myths that you've been carrying with you for probably all of your life.
Yeah, I want to hit another relevant point there on the living below your means versus expanding your means, and it really takes the same amount of energy and effort that it does to live below your means and focus on saving here, saving there, driving across town for the cheapest gas, and it does actually expand your means and think in a bigger manner, right? And think in a bigger way. And so, really, all you need to do is figure out how to divert that attention, that focus in the opposite direction. I mean, maybe it's not as simple as it sounds, Keith, but it really does take the same amount of energy if you think about it.
That's right. It truly does. And it's actually really good news once one realizes that it doesn't take any more energy to think big and to act big than it does to think and act small. And hopefully I've given a lot of examples for that. And, maybe one last really important thing I want to say on this, and this is more good news for you, is you know what? You don't have to be the smartest person. You don't have to be the most hardworking person in order to be wealthy. You just need to be bold, okay? If you're bold, you don't need to be the most articulate or the smartest or the most hardworking. And, don't be afraid to, actually it sounds a little weird, but don't be afraid to kind of be abnormal. I mean, think about it. Who really wants to be normal? Normal is overweight, underexercised, underslept, and not having enough money at the end of the month. So if you do what everyone else does, you're only going to get what everyone else has.
Yeah, that's great advice. So you tell me that I should go spray paint my hair pink then, Keith? Is that being abnormal?
I don't know how that's going to create wealth, but you sure
I know. We get some attention, right? That's about it. Well, fantastic. This has been a lot of fun. Before we go, I want to ask you a question I like to ask all the guests I have on the show. And so it will actually probably feed back into a few of these 5 different myths that are here. And this is, you've been doing this now for a number of years. You've been investing in real estate very successfully. If you could go back into year 1 of your real estate investing business, right when you're first getting started, after knowing what you know today, after obtaining all this knowledge that you have, what would you tell yourself? What would you tell Keith back then?
Don't self-manage for so long. I self-managed my own properties for 5.5 years.
Did you really? Call it, wow.
I did, and that's a mistake, and I can't undo that. And sure, I learned some lessons, but in property management, you learn most of the lessons that you need to know in the first year or two. Property management, as much as I respect the managers that manage my properties, I need them to help secure my income streams. Property management is a low-paid, not very highly respected profession, and it can be stressful. They call the discipline property management, but it really ought to be called tenant management. And that's where the real stress comes in. Dealing with tenants can make you lose faith in humanity. So I would not have self-managed for so long. Over a Get Rich Education, I recommend to most people, it's helpful if you can self-manage for 1 to 2 years, but think about why you're really investing. Why are you buying these properties? It's to live a big life and not self-manage long-term.
Mm-hmm. No, I completely agree with that. I do that. I think there's a lot of value in actually learning, tenant landlord laws and learning the business of managing your property, so that when you do go hire that third party property management company, you can efficiently manage them. Right? It's still your job to keep a tab on how good of a job they're doing, how good of a job they are with managing your properties. Right? It's still your job to manage them, but you can't understand that unless you do a little bit yourself. But also, you don't want to get stuck in the rut of managing all of your own properties because you think you can do it better than someone else. And I think that's where a lot of landlords, that's where they get burnt out. And I think that is really the difference. That is the drastic difference between a landlord and a property investor or a real estate investor. I mean, a drastic difference there. I always tell people, you do not want to be a landlord. You be a landlord as long as you need to, until you feel like you have the education to outsource it to someone a little bit more competent than yourself, and so that you buy yourself that free time that you've been looking for.
Yeah, that's right. It was very well said. And yeah, we want to be the best investor that we can be, not the best landlord we can be. And we kind of put ourselves in a position where we have control of our properties. We can let our manager know if maybe we want to improve a vacant unit before the next tenant comes in, but we didn't have to be directly involved with the friction in being face-to-face with a tenant. So kind of like we were talking about earlier, it comes down to what's your return on time invested. That's the most important investor metric of them all. Some people refer to it as your ROI as return on involvement. What's your return on involvement over time? As real estate investors, we have all these metrics we look at. We get a little mathematical. What's your cash on cash return? What's your internal rate of return? What's your cap rate? But the most important metric of them all is one that you've never seen on a Microsoft Excel spreadsheet, and that is, what is your return on time invested?
No, absolutely. In fact, that really is the most important. I mean, of 20% cash on cash return, everyone's very happy with that number. But a 20% cash on cash return on $1,000 is probably not very life changing. But a 20% cash on cash return on $1 million is. So again, the return on time, it takes the same amount of time to attain that 20% cash on cash return on that $1,000 versus the 20% on the $1 million. Then where's your time better spent? So I think that's great advice, Keith. Well, fantastic. This has been a lot of fun here today. I really appreciate you coming on the show. I mean, you're an absolute wealth of knowledge. And, for those that want to learn more about Keith and his company and all the services and resources that he offers, Keith, the best place for them to reach you is GetRichEducation.com. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's GetRichEducation.com and the Get Rich Education podcast. And on the podcast, we get a lot of big name guests on there. I've interviewed Robert Kiyosaki, and his Rich Dad Advisors come on frequently. I have great access to those guys since I'm a contributing writer to the Rich Dad Advisors myself. T. Harv Eker, prominent economists like Harry Dent, and that's all at the Get Rich Education podcast.
Okay, well, fantastic, Keith. Thank you very much for being a guest on the show, and you have a wonderful week, my friend.
Thanks so much for having me, Kevin. It was fun.
Congratulations! Now you've got more of the best tricks of the trade in building massive amounts of passive income from real estate. For more amazing resources, visit realestateinvestingforcashflow.com, and we'll see you next Monday morning.